After Mark's presentation, I feel a little competitive. I feel like maybe I'm going to need to do a step aside, and I don't have one planned, but really enjoyed the spirit of that. So a couple of years ago, I got into it on Facebook. You've been there, right? Yeah, got into it, but it was about painting, not about politics. And I was looking at a painting that I just thought was a little bit academic and which lacked feeling. And I said so on Facebook. And the discussion kind of went back and forth and went away. But later that evening, I got a message from the artist who had painted it. And the message was both kind of affectionate and sarcastic. It said, well, John, I would have expected you to have that opinion. You're one of those David Park people. So I took that actually as a very high compliment. And I want to tell you how I became one of those David Park people. And I also want to reassure you that being a David Park person, like Francis, I don't like labels. One of the things that I think, if there is a label, if there's a David Park person, it involves being very broad and very imaginative and very broad and accepting. But the way I got introduced to David Park, it was 43 years ago. And I want to tell you that when I walked into the show across the hallway, that's the first time in 43 years I've seen a David Park retrospective. I missed the '89 show that Janet Bishop worked on. So 43 years between this show and the show that made such an impact on me. I was a sophomore in college. I had just declared an art major, and I went up to the Oakland Museum, and I don't need to tell you about the impact that the paintings made. Except maybe I do, because I want to personalize it a little bit. I didn't know that painting could be like this. I hadn't seen paintings like David Park paintings that were so filled with humanity, that were so honest, that were so much about paint. So they made an indelible impression. And I did what art students do. I went back to the studio, and I made very, very bad David Park paintings. And I'll let the screen attest to that. There was a value in making very bad David Park paintings, looking back. And the value was, by trying to do a David Park, I learned, I had to understand that there were decades and decades of instinct and practice and feeling and discipline and drawing underneath every David Park painting. And that you could maybe imitate the surface of something, but the depth belonged to that artist alone. So in making bad David Park paintings, there was some value. So I looked up Lydia Park Moore's address in the phone book, and she was listed in Montecito. And so I wrote her a fan letter. I just told her I loved David's paintings, and I got a letter back. And that letter is still, it's the catalog marker for my torn apart David Park catalog from 1977. I still have the letter, and I'm going to read you just one sentence from it. It says, if an artist, or any human being for that matter, can give another individual encouragement, hope, a desire to believe in his own work, then the whole effort is worthwhile. And along with that letter came a David Park wash drawing. In a brown envelope, came in separate post. So what an impact was made by her generosity. And I did later visit her home, and I saw the cellist there at the home. Today's the first time I've seen the cellist in 42 years. So all of this made a tremendous impact on me. I actually, secondarily as an art student, but primarily as a human being. First, just the kindness of everything that happened connected with David Park made a very big impact. So you can see there an image of the David Park nude that Lydia sent to me. I also had a couple of other David Park drawings, because you could go to Maxwell Galleries on Sutter Street in San Francisco, and they had a big folder of David Park drawings. And they were all about $200 each, and I'd buy them on the installment plan, $50 a month. And I had them around the house for a long time. And it was kind of comical. This is a little embarrassing, but very real. I was looking for photographs of my David Park collection, and I found one of my dad napping under a David Park crowd. So I don't know if he'd like me showing his napping pictures. He was a good napper, and I'm a good napper also. But there's my dad napping under a David Park, and there's a David Park in my painting studio where I was in graduate school. So the David Parks, they were around. You know, I was looking at them, and I had these 4 images, so they seeped into me yet another way. And a very nice moment in graduate school, I attended Berkeley, and Elmer Bischoff came to my studio and gave a crit at my studio, and he saw the David Park drawing, and we had quite a conversation about that. Another exposure I had to David Park came through this very remarkable family. My second year of college, in fact, just after I saw the Park show, I became an intern for Hunk and Moo Anderson. And they are legends in the Bay Area. They may be new as people to some of you here in Kalamazoo, but let's just say that they were very forward-looking, very generous people. I'm sure they're much like the patrons that support what you do here in Kalamazoo. And they had several works by David Park, including The 4 Women that is here in the exhibition. And that painting hung in Saga Foods, which was a corporation that Hunk Anderson had co-founded. And my job as an intern was to give tours of Saga Foods. So I very often walked by the 4 Women. I'll tell you something about it. Here's a little known fact about that painting. When it was being delivered to Saga, a forklift tine went through the crate that was holding it. And it was very carefully repaired. You can't see the repair anymore. And I think Hunk and Moo were very, very protective of this painting, partly for that reason. But the painting was around, and now it's part of the Anderson collection. It's on permanent view at Stanford. So there was something a little unconscious about David Park and the David Park story that got into me. When I was done with graduate school, I moved back to LA, to be broke, which is what you do after graduate school. And I had this idea that I wanted to take all my paintings from graduate school to the dump. So I did. And I guess I had a David Park moment. I want to tell you, my dog did not go to the dump. That's my dog, Terrell. Terrell got off the car right after this photo was taken. I have to tell you, it was very, very liberating. It was really one of the better things I did, because we'd had a guest speaker come to Berkeley at one point, and we asked for advice for art students. And I don't remember the guy's name, but I remember what he said. He said, "Someday you will have a storage problem." And he was right. So I think that's another way, but maybe I'm going to say it with a little less humor. Something good I took away from thinking about David Park and his career was kind of like a Buddhist thing of it's okay to destroy on your way to where you're going. You don't have to take everything you do so seriously. So as I spent my career as a community college art instructor, I'm going to say David Park went to the background for a long time. And then he began to reemerge, in the new millennium. That sounds good to say it that way. Partly because 2 great books came out. Helen's book came out, and Nancy Boas's book came out. And through email and then later in person, I was able to have conversations with both of them to get their point of view. And both of these books together, they complement each other so richly, because Helen's book it's a daughter's point of view. And add to that, Helen's an excellent writer. But it's very direct and intimate, and you just feel like you felt when you heard Natalie earlier today, you felt like you've got a real glimpse of the people involved. And Nancy's book is art historical. It is beautifully organized, it's complete, it has rich context. I think she spent nearly 20 years, working on it. So both of those books really awakened in me a new interest in Park. And add to that, I was writing. That's the way I think a lot of people know me. They know that I had a blog on the Huffington Post for 7 years. And I was able to interview Nancy. I was able to write about David Park a little bit. There's some examples of some of the blogs that I did. And something I learned about writing is that writing is self-education. So by reading the books and then writing myself about David Park, there was a sense of things coming full circle for me. I want to mention maybe my favorite writing project having to do with David Park, and that is that by being in touch with Natalie, she sent me a box of slides and photos that she'd been holding on to for a long time, and she said, you can use these for your research on Edith. And I have to tell you, my opinion after learning about her is that she's absolutely crucial to the David Park story. She's crucial in terms of what she did for him, recognizing that he needed to get out of the school he hated and study art and come to LA. But she's also, and art historians, take note, she's a big influence on David Park. And the way Natalie tells it, many people assume that David Park influenced Edith. And I think the family has it straight. She influenced David Park. Very, very great personality from what I understand. So I wrote a very small blurb book about Edith Park Truesdell, gathered photos, gathered stories, and really got to know one of the great people, one of the great forces in his life. So the connection got renewed when Jessica at Hackett Mill asked if I would write the catalog for Interiors and Places, which you got today as a gift. And attending that opening was, and I'm not going to get too sappy, but it was a real high point of my career. That's probably the best writing job I've ever gotten. And that's not to say I haven't had good writing jobs, but just writing about David Park, that just felt so good. And I went with friends. We had dinner beforehand. We took in the show, seeing paintings that we hadn't seen before, hadn't seen for a long time. And the show just resonated again. It was like 1977 all over again. David Park has something to say. And that's where I got to see the Kalamazoo Collection's coffee pot, which had been recently rediscovered, and Belinda Tate was there. So all kinds of introductions were being made through Hackett Mill. So in the spring of 2017, I was asked, if I could do an exhibition, if I could help organize an exhibition, what would it be? Because there was a new art history building going up at Santa Clara University. And we came up, I worked with Kelly Detweiler, we came up with the idea of a juried show, also an invitational show, and we wanted to honor the legacy of David Park. That was the theme for the show. So this was put together, and we had support, and I want to say something about support before I say something about the show. One of the things I've gotten involved in through writing is that I'm on the board of the Sam Francis Foundation, which came from the estate of the painter Sam Francis. And being part of that, I heard a story that I don't think has been told enough, but it's a story about David Park that needs to be told. When Sam Francis was injured in a training accident, in an Air Force training accident, he was hospitalized at Fort Miley Hospital for nearly a year. And he was in extreme misery. He was badly injured. He had spinal tuberculosis on top of that. And someone gave him watercolors and he began to paint. And then David Park heard about him through a friend, and David Park visited, for starters, and then this is the part that kills me, he actually arranged for paintings from the DeYoung Museum to be brought to Fort Miley Hospital for Sam Francis to see them there. So all his life, Sam Francis talked about David Park with veneration for what he had done. I think it's very important to tell that story, and that's one of the reasons when you look at the sponsors of the David Park show, because we ran out of money for shipping. That's another story. But the sponsors were Hunk and Moo Anderson sponsored, but the Sam Francis Foundation also helped sponsor that show. So we had two painters that we featured. We featured the work of Kyle Staver from the East Coast, and then we've also featured the work of Jennifer Paczynski. And I think it's interesting. I was talking to Holly Sturgis about this a little bit earlier. It's really interesting how women artists are coming on strong, and many of the artists that really responded to Park's legacy, were emerging women painters. We had a wonderful showing from the Park family, and I really treasure that picture of four of David's relatives, two of his daughters, there in a row attending. We were really, touched that they were there. And during the panel discussion, Helen opened up and told us a lot, answered a lot of questions. She was very supportive and admiring of Jennifer Paczynski, who was one of our featured artists. And this is just something to make you laugh. I want to show you, talk about David Park people, how much were we into it. There's a little bit of a Photoshop I did later, because, we had that woman with a cigarette painting in back of Jennifer, and we realized later she's living it. Yeah, just, we really, we're really part of that David Park world. Anyways, that's the funny part of the talk, yeah. So I had a favorite moment in that event, and the moment was someone asked Helen, if your father had lived longer, if David had lived longer, what would have happened to his work? And her answer was great. She said it would have been about paint. And that, of all of the things she said, that stayed with me the most. And it ties in with something that Francis was talking about and something I've heard artists talk about. I don't know if you've ever seen the work of Vincent Desiderio, very, very striking, very powerful painter who shows at Forum Gallery. He talks about painting having a technical narrative. And what that means, in straightforward terms, is that the traces of an artist's effort, the fact you can see how an artist scraped or struggled or changed his or her mind or moved something or put physical effort into the painting, is a big part of why we appreciate the painting. And when I heard Vincent talk about that, I thought that's a big reason I love Park. It sounds academic, doesn't it? Technical narrative. But I love in Park that he is so there in the paintings and they're so physically alive, and his effort to make the painting is such a big part of the image. So we had a jury award prizes in that show. The first prize went to Gage Optenbrow, and I'm going to talk more about him in a minute. But it's kind of like a lineage, thinking about David Park, honoring his work, talking about who he was, I think affected everybody. And that led to a book project. And the book project is called Disrupted Realism. It's a book I was able to publish last fall, and it's about the idea that so much contemporary painting that I now admire or that I'm seeing on social media has an element of something else coming through the image, of some kind of sense of memory or subjectivity or, something that, disrupts, something that breaks the literality of the image. And I want to say that I think I was sensitized to that by Park. Because Bay Area painting, it's full of hybrids, right? Something or someone you can recognize, but paired with pure paint. And that really opened me up to this idea. So I want to show you some of the artists that are included in that book. This is Jerome Lagarrigue. And I looked at his paintings of heads as I was putting together the book, and I thought, what a conversation he and Park would have had about what pure paint can say when it's part of an image. Or a detail of a painting by Justin Bauer. Something that I appreciate about current painting, something I'm really enjoying, is I think the old tensions between representational and abstract have really fallen away. It's like an old generation. In the 50s, the vanguard was abstraction, and there was a lot of anger about that still. But now, I think what Richard Diebenkorn called the alternate ends of the stick, the two ends of the stick, they just play with each other all the time. In Justin Bauer's painting, there is abstract brushwork and there's very crisp representation. Gage Optenbrow takes a lot of liberties with the figures and is very, very poetic in what he can say about the figure with drips and smudges and splashes. Another Jerome Lagarrigue. Boy, I love Park's paintings of heads. And there's something so universal and eternal and attention-getting about the idea of the portrait and what you can say with it as you abstract it, as you're subjective about it, as Park was. Something that I tried very hard to do when putting together this book was emphasize the individuality of the artists. Because one of the other lessons I've taken away from Bay Area painting is that idea that you find yourself, that there's something that you are meant to do or that you have to do, that it takes an effort or a struggle to get there, to be genuine, to be authentic. And so I wasn't looking for artists that did things the same way, or that even, you would, on any easy level, group, with other artists. Like Francis, I'm a little bit scared of labels. I don't want to put a label on groups of people and then make them uncomfortable or shut down something that they are doing. But in a loose way, in the work I've been coming across and the work I've been admiring, there is a subjectivity and there's a sense of breadth and a sense of imagination that I hope and I kind of think that David Park would have admired. One more bit of Bay Area wisdom. Not long ago, I got to go to the 100th birthday party for Peter Sells, the wonderful art historian who taught at Berkeley and who was the first director of the Berkeley Museum. I say this as you look at a painting by Anne Gale. And one of his favorite sayings, something he said very often in his career, is, "Art has many faces." Jay Lewis, who shows at Arcadia Gallery in Pasadena, pure paint, along with something very crisp that we can recognize. Ty Samuel Davers is a painter up in Inverness. A lot of palette knife work. Zach Sidrael has lived with a brain tumor, and somehow that comes through in the subjectivity of the way he paints himself, what it feels like. Catherine Kehoe, wonderful artist who's giving workshops at Black Pond, breaks her work into planes and facets, almost like a personal kind of cubism. And there is, just a favorite David Park quote, something that I just keep thinking about, and I know you'll be thinking about it as you go back to the exhibit. As you grow older, it dawns on you that you are yourself, that your job is not to force yourself into a style, but to do what you want. Boy, such a hard lesson to actually live, right? So much harder than it sounds, but it's an admirable goal. And I just want to close by saying that what David Park has meant for me, it has been so far-reaching, reaches far beyond art. It just reaches so directly into my life. But I tried to be very succinct in talking about what David Park has meant. Absolutely, his legacy means individualism, right? He's the guy who, when everyone else was painting abstraction, when that was the dominant modern style, he said, "That's not right for me," and he turned it around. And a lot of people were very surprised or thought he had lost his nerve. But he very much stands for individualism. I think David Park, and I'm just going to say it, I think his whole family stand for encouragement. Lydia encouraged me. Helen and Natalie have been encouraging. It's a lovely family. I think the legacy comes through that way. And as we were hearing from Mark today, there's encouragement for teachers, I think, in the humanity and the individuality that Park espoused. And then finally, and so importantly, at a time where we all know there's a lot of cynicism that we're dealing with on a daily basis, there's a great respect for humanity in Park's paintings. When he paints the figure, it is so affectionate and it's so genuine. There's so much of how he felt about other people in the work. And even though that's unconscious in a lot of the paintings, it has been a powerful presence. It's been something I've thought about for many, many years. Thank you so much.